guys? Good. We have empty seats. Midterm classes started. Oh, it's up to you, right? That's okay.
Yeah, there's another door over there. So no.
Oh, good to know.
This is where we are going to start posting these lectures. So if you want to go back to a lecture, or if you you miss a week and you want to catch up on what I said, or yada yada, you can't get enough of Brandon, Isaac is setting up a website on our thing to do this. So, all right, let's go ahead and kick things off with some Q&A. See what you guys are curious about hearing from me today, how things are going. Ask questions about your stories. What we're going to do today is we will do setting today. And after today, we'll have covered basically, we will have covered everything, at least in part, except the business side of things, which is what I'll do when I get back from my Words of Radiance tour. So the Words of Radiance tour, you won't have me on the 6th or the 13th or the 20th. And that's when Howard and Eric and Jancy will come and speak to you instead. I'm not sure the weeks on those, but you're still required to come and do your write-up and all that stuff, and Isaac will be here checking on you. So. All right, questions. What are you guys worried about this week or have questions about? Nothing? You got it? Yeah.
How do you balance description with
How do you manage good description with being brief? This is actually next week's lecture, so I'll just go ahead and put it off. This is the idea behind not info dumping and doing concrete description. We'll talk about that next week. So good question, but I will shove that one out. Okay. Anything else? Maybe I should start talking. Go ahead. If you think about things, maybe I need to ask for questions at the end. But I like breaking the ice with some questions. So we'll do a few, and if you think of ones during, I'll try and leave some time at the end for more questions. Planning something large scale. Okay, I think I can talk about this a little bit. So here's the deal. A lot of us read epic fantasy and science fiction because we love the idea of this large scale work, right? Once upon a time, everyone who broke into this business did an apprenticeship writing short stories. That's how you found people breaking in. They wrote some short stories, they published them in the big magazines. This is during the heyday of the magazines. And that was basically everybody. Then what happened is novels started taking off as a form for our genres. And the magazines started, therefore, their readership went down, magazine readership went down all across the board as this happened, but really it happened a lot in our industry as people realized that novels were a viable form. If you go back, there weren't really science fiction and fantasy publishers before the 70s. I mean, there were, I think the first one, Ace, was started in the 60s, but all the other books were really being published by mainstream publishers who weren't really sure what to do with science fiction and fantasy. Kind of a newer genre of things. And so then they started releasing their own imprints. I think, like I said, Ace was the first. And then you have Del Rey, and you had Tor, and you had some of these that started up that really were focused on science fiction fantasy. And in the 70s and 80s, it became a very viable literature form that was selling, and by the 90s, it was selling hardcovers. What that meant was that my generation was the first one really that grew up reading novels and not short stories. And that happened that you started to see then in the 90s when my generation started writing and publishing, that very few of us were really experts in short stories, and we weren't writing them. And so this whole apprenticeship thing of, you write short stories first stopped happening. How many here have a subscription to a science fiction or fantasy short form magazine or webzine or something like that? What do you read?
It's Beyond Ceaseless Skies.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that one. Daily SF is quite popular too, and then there's the mainstays, analog, science, after things. But you'll see, not very many hands went up. We are not. The newer generations don't read as much short fiction. It's experiencing a bit of a resurgence because of the internet and some distribution methods. But how does this have to do with what you're saying? Well, my generation grew up reading epic fantasy. I did. And you don't read a whole bunch of something without wanting to write it. That's what you set your goals high. The problem there is, learning to write something like this is really tough. Learning to write a short story is really tough too, but you can do the short story thing a whole bunch of times and complete one. And writing something very long form, it's hard. It takes a lot of time to complete even a novel, let alone finishing multiple series. And so what you end up with are people like Robert Jordan who hadn't really been able to read long form series, having to figure out how to do it as they go along. Which is why if you read some of these, the 90s ones, you'll be like, wow, there are some issues with the whole large-scale thing. But it was forging new ground. There were no epic, science fiction and fantasies of the length Robert Jordan was doing. How does this come to you? Advice for you. There's a couple of pitfalls you can fall into. A lot of aspiring writers who read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, they will want to do this big epic fantasy. And so they will spend, they'll start thinking of it when they're teenagers, and they will spend the next 15 years planning it and having this ideal story, and it will transform multiple times. You're fist bumping. Has this happened? And you've got this perfect story that you've just been working on since you were a kid, and it has all this weird stuff on it, because when you were a kid, you came up with things, and you inserted them into the world, and you kept them, even though they don't really fit anymore, and your stories become a new thing and another new thing, and you've world built all this time. The number one thing I would suggest for you to do is throw all of that away and start fresh with something else. That's not to say you're never going to write that one, but if you don't have the experience writing, you can never tackle this huge thing. And so, learning how to write a novel is the number one thing that's going to help you write your large-scale thing. And I would try so hard. Your apprenticeship now, it's a different level. Instead of apprenticing with short fiction and then writing a novel, you're going to apprentice on novels before you jump into something that's 10 books long or that's interconnected. And your job is to be able to tell a really killer story in one book that then you can learn to expand to do more. And so practice writing the one book. Now, because if you can't write that first book really well, no one's going to want to care about everything else. Now, that doesn't mean you can't embed all these things, but you want to be very careful. The kind of magic phrase that has been used, I think I mentioned to you guys before, I really feel that the idea of a standalone novel with serious potential is where you want to be as a new writer. Now, that's not to say, again, all of these things I'm telling you are bits of advice that will be helpful, I hope, to you. But if they are not, if it destroys your passion for the project you're working on, you should throw my advice away. The number one thing you need to do is actually keep writing. But practice writing the novel is what I would say. Once you've got that down, once you've finished a few novels, then you can start to look at the grander epic with the same sort of plotting structure that works very well for you, whatever it is, for the large scale. For instance, if it's the 3-act format, you can say, all right, I'm going to do my 3 acts, and my 3 acts are going to be books. This is how you create the trilogy. And you can plot, the 3 acts into, you've got the first act's intro, you've got the call, kind of, or whatever, they decide to act, things get worse. You've got the low point, and then you've got the pull it off. Now this works as a book. It also works as a trilogy. Star Trek Episode 4, Introduction. End of Star Trek Episode 4. I am now called to be a Jedi and have finally accepted the call. Episode 5, things get worse. So 4, 5. This is 4, 5, yeah. Episode 4, 5, things get worse. Star Trek, Star Wars, things get worse. The low point is, end of Empire Strikes Back, and then Return of the Jedi, Yaddy Walks. Whatever it is, Star Wars. You guys knew what I was saying. Nothing's worse than mentioning. So you've got the trilogy. Do you see this, how this trilogy form works for a trilogy of novels as well as the 3 acts for a single novel. Well, that's just one method of doing it. You can look at however you plot, and you can, whether it's the bracketing method, whatever it is, to do the large-scale series, you probably want to do a little more plotting, a little less discovery writing, but whatever you want. I mean, if you're a discovery writer, you can do the big epic series in the Anne McCaffrey way, which is like, here's a book, here's a book, here's a book. And yes, they're in a sequence, but they each are about different characters, and they connect it, only very loosely. If you bracket, you can be like, here is the big plot of the series. We'll do a little bit of introducing that, and then we'll do book, 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 or whatever you want to do. Or if you've got the goal method, or whatever, however it is, you can try and apply that, but practice that in the novel form first. Some people will tell you to practice that in the short story form, but if you don't read them, I don't think that you will write very good ones. So, yeah. Does that help? Yes.
Last time we talked about using the iPhone for multiple.
Yes.
It's a problem, right? Sometimes it's hard for the reader to tell
Yes.
which characters the island, which characters.
Mhm.
So what are some of the things that you discover?
Switching,
that,
yeah.
limitation on how many characters you want to put the iPhone on? Or do you want to
Right.
just
For a
do-
first person, how many characters, how do you switch? There is no hard rule. You do what you want to do. Understanding the form's limitations. The form is going to cause some issues in that area. But the thing I've seen done most often is that people title the chapter after the character that it's going to be about. And that's just the simplest method. Has anyone seen anything else? I see that one a lot. Yeah.
There was a YA book I read that they did title each chapter after the character, but each one had a very distinct voice.
Right. Having a very distinct voice could also do it. Yeah. How does this thing work, Isaac? Do I just hit open? I just want to make sure that there wasn't a cap on it or something. Oh, it's pretty low. All right. So anyone else seen? Yeah.
Odessa has one. There's 4 viewpoint characters, and I think it uses different font for each one. They're also
Okay.
very different sentence styles. One of them is just uses very short thoughts.
Okay. So he changes the writing style and uses a different font. 4 different ones. How'd it work? Were you able to keep track?
Yeah, it was so easy.
There you go.
It was never an issue.
So there you go. All right, let's talk about setting. And if you have questions, I'll try to give you time at the end. Everyone's got brandsanderson.com/writing-advice. All right, so finally we come to it. In some ways the most important, in some ways the least important of the 3 things I wrote on the board the first day: plot, setting, and character. Both the most important because it's why we're reading these genres. It's why you're in this class as opposed to being in one of the other creative writing classes being offered. Least important because if you have, as I said, terrible characters and a bad plot, it doesn't matter how good this is, you're not going to have a successful novel. You might be able to have a successful short story. Because short stories, part of the job is to show one really great thing, do one thing and do it really well. Is one of the things that a great short story can do. An example of this is Asimov's short stories, which are fantastic, but often are idea stories. They're not about character. And that's okay. I love reading those stories. When he writes his novel-length things, you get a lot more character. Caves of Steel deals with character, whereas a lot of his robot short stories are, why are the robots acting so weird? Setting is wonderful. I became a fantasy reader because of setting. I think I've told you guys this story. When I was young, I was not a reader. And it was when a teacher handed me Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hamley, which is a really weird book to have work for me. I'm 14 years old. If anyone's hasn't read Dragon's Bane is basically the story. It's the main character is a woman. She's middle-aged, in her 40s or something like that. She has a family, and she's been told that she can be the greatest witch who ever lived. She's got lots of natural talent. By her teacher tells her this, but she just has to dedicate herself fully to her magic. But she can't because she's got this family. And so it's about a middle-aged woman trying to choose between her career and her family, right? And this is not the book that should have worked for a 14-year-old boy, right? If you're going to say, write on the board the list of things that a boy my age should have fallen in love with reading, it would not list midlife crisis for a mother. And yet, it grabbed me. the idea of, her husband is a retired dragon slayer who now is like the mayor of a small town and herds pigs. And the idea of the magic mixed with all these things was really powerful to me. At the same time, my mother graduated #1 in her class at BYU in the accounting department in a year when she was the only woman in the accounting department. Yes, in accounting. Yes, only woman in the department, and she graduated first. And she got offered all sorts of wonderful scholarships to go be a CPA, and she decided she wanted to have a family instead. She actually turned those down. She's now accounting for the city of Idaho Falls, but during the time when she had young kids, she decided she wanted to be at home with the kids. Now, being the first of those kids, my thoughts were always, of course she did that, because I'm awesome. Right? Of course, that's what you're supposed to do. Of course she gave up all of this stuff to have me. But it was really weird. So I'm reading this book, and I'm like, hey, that's like my mom. My mom did this. Wow, this is a really hard choice for this woman. I want her to totally go be a wizard. Why is she not being, well, she's got these kids. And those dopey kids are me and my brother. And I'm reading this fantasy novel, and I'm understanding my mother better. And I'm having a blast doing it, plus there are dragons. And years later, I can look back at this book, and I'm like, what worked? Why? And, as a kid, I'm not even thinking all this. I'm like, wow, this is like mom. But I'm not really making this connection. And looking back, and it is the mixture of the things that it's not that I didn't want to read about the real world. I did. I wanted to read about characters that I sympathized with. But I was bored with only that. That's why it didn't work. People kept handing me books that they said that I should love. And they were just boring to me. And add a fantastical element to jump that learning curve up a little bit, to engage my imagination, and leave all of the other stuff, and you had, for me, the perfect genre. It's why I love fantasy. I feel that a good fantasy or science fiction novel can do all the things that any other genre can do, plus it can have dragons, so why not? And we're going to talk about the plus it can have dragons today. When we talk about character and plot, you may have noticed I talk a lot about formulas. It's not because I think writing should be formulaic, but as writers we use tools. We say, I want to achieve this effect. How can I achieve this effect? Well, I'm going to look at stories that have achieved this effect before in the past. I'm going to say, what did they do, and how can these tools help me to write the story I want to write? And plot and character, there are certain things that are good old standbys that work so well, like the 3-act format, or like creating an engaging, sympathetic character that you want to read about. Setting, the gloves are off. There aren't formulas as much for setting. I'm going to give you some storytelling guidelines that I have applied to my world building. But I personally feel, you're getting Brandon's hobby horse now, I personally feel that fantasy and science fiction, particularly fantasy, has this danger of falling into ruts. We read the genre because we like the new and original, but we get familiar with what was new and original, and then we just keep reading that, and we start to feel that the genre is defined by that. Is there something funny on the computer?
Yes.
Oh,
That I typed.
awesome.
I want to,
Don't worry about it. I'm just making sure my fly wasn't down or something. Yeah, on videotape, Isaac Coast said, hey, look. I feel that the genre has a real danger of stagnation because of that. We become experts, as I said, in the learning curve thing, and then we get comfortable reading about that, and then over time we start to say, oh, this genre is boring, it's not giving me the same thing that it used to give me. And that's a fault both of the authors and the industry, but also on ourselves, because we forget that this idea of trying new and original things is what drew us to the genre in the first place. And then we get accustomed to the things that we were reading about, and then we get bored with the genre. I've met many a reader who has left the genre, particularly it happens in the college years, we find, because they're like, yeah, fantasy all felt the same. And I feel the genre should never have that danger. We are the most imaginative genre out there. We can do literally anything. And so one of my personal hobby horses is the suggestion that you as writers should be looking to stretch, particularly in your setting, but also in the types of plots you do, and the types of stories you tell. and look for different feels and different things you can do. And the place you can stretch the most is the setting. When I am developing a setting, in my notes files, I'm usually dividing it into two basic kinds. One is the cultural setting, and one is the physical. These, of course, are going to influence each other quite a bit. However, you can make an easy distinction to say, these are the setting aspects that would exist in your world only because of sentient beings' influence. This stuff would all be there anyway. So if you take all the people away, what do you have left? That's your physical setting. When you have your cultural setting, it's what are the people causing? Now, when I'm brainstorming, one of the things I realized very early on is, and this is kind of like one of my first, these aren't Sanderson's laws yet, we will do those, named very humbly. This is just a general guideline that I use for world building that's a good reminder for myself, which is you can't do everything. All right? Tolkien tried, and he did a really good job of trying to get everything down. And he spent, whatever it was, 20 years is the number I always throw around, but I'm not sure what it actually was. He spent many years. Someone must have rubbed against the thing in the back. Hello?
Sorry.
Somebody turn on the lights.
Oh, I'm sorry. I won't fix it.
Okay, yay! So, Tolkien tried. He spent however many years, 20 years or something like that, trying to come up with every aspect of his world, and even he couldn't do everything. When you read those books that are holes, that he just can't include them. You were taking the assumption that you want to be a working professional writer of science fiction and fantasy. That's the assumption for this class. That doesn't have to be true, but it is part of the assumption for this class. As we brainstorm all of these different things that you can do cool stuff with, keep in mind that you usually want to pick a couple of them, depending on the length of your story, to be a focus for the story, to intersect with the characters and their conflicts, to be something that the characters care about. If the characters don't care about it, you shouldn't spend a lot of time in your book world building it for the reader. The reader will follow, and this is like a rule of characterization. One of the things I intend to talk about the second character today, I don't know if I'll actually have time to it, but readers will follow the character's attention, okay? What the characters are passionate about, the readers will want to learn about to an extent. What the character focuses on, the reader's attention will focus on. And if your characters are not focused on these things, if these are not integral parts of their lives, then it's not going to be important for you. This is why you run into the cliche of the characters on the road trip, and they pass a mound, and you, as a writer, have spent years world building, and you want to get this information, it's that onto the page, because you spent all this time doing it. And so, you have a big explanation of the battle that was fought on this hill. And once in a while, a really great writer manages to make that all work into the story. Most of the time, when new writers are doing it, it's this boring 3-page thing that has nothing to do with the story, that only is you showing off your world building. The goal on the writer's part in doing that is, well, I'll show the breadth of the world. I'll make it feel real. The problem is if you bore your reader while you're doing that, because the characters aren't really that interested, it's not something passionate to them, you're not adding depth to the world, you're adding pages to the world, which are different. Okay? You can't do everything. So, in some of my books, I pick the languages to be a major point in the books. Linguistics is important. I will world build the linguistics. I will make it a plot point. The clash between different races is important, and things like this. In other books, they speak the galactic standard, and we just deal with that. Right? Mistborn, everyone speaks the same language. It takes place in one city. There's not a clash of cultures because there's been 1,000 years of a dictatorship oppressing cultures and melding them together intentionally, and they speak galactic standard. I didn't make linguistics a big deal in that book. In Elantris, I made linguistics a big deal because the magic system is based on language. So this is something that I just came about as I was trying to world build some of these things that I realized I can't do everything. All right? So let's talk about some of the different things that we can come up with, that we can brainstorm. Now, as we're brainstorming these, I want you to be thinking about, how can I do an original take on this? What can I do to something original that will be a source of conflict? That will be a source of passion, either love or hate, to a character. Something that gives me cool descriptions. Adding in the unofficial Sanderson zeroth law, which is err on the side of awesome. I don't want to talk about this also academically and sterilely, that you don't understand and realize that what we are doing in this genre, what we love to do, is stuff that is awesome. Okay? This is the difference you're going to get in this class as opposed to taking the poetry class. We want to do mind-blowingly cool things. This is why dragons exist, okay? Because dragons are cool. Do dragons make sense? No, dragons do not make sense. We can try to make them make sense, but they really don't. But they're cool, and there is an innate coolness to some of this stuff that no amount of sitting and academically saying, why? What is the innate coolness of this object? We can't tell you, right? It's like trying to describe why something is fun. Why is it fun to play this game? Why is it fun to ride a roller coaster? Well, the thrill of anticipation. No, it's fun because it's fun. Some things are awesome because they're awesome. And you want to be looking for things that are awesome. And hopefully your world building is going to be your main sources of awesomeness. I can't describe to you what's going to be awesome because it's very, very individual. But you should always be doing things that you think are awesome. All right? And what's awesome to you may not work for someone else, and that's okay. If you think it's really cool, someone else is going to think it's really cool, and it's going to add something to your book. So, err on the side of awesome. All right, so let's start with physical setting. And I'm meaning things such as interesting topography. Have you read books with interesting topography?
Way of King.
Way of King does have some interesting topography, I hope. Interesting. Well, what's the book? I'm trying to remember it. There is a book that takes place in a slot in a world. In the entire world, no one can get beyond these mountains. It's a valley that spans the entire world. And what's that?
Riverworld?
Is it Riverworld? Yeah.
Maybe?
Maybe. I'm trying to remember what it is.
There's a giant river running through it?
Yeah, there's a giant river running through it. There's another book that recently I didn't read, but I thought was awesome, that all took place on a bridge. A massive bridge crossing an ocean. And the people were crossing it and walking for years on this bridge. And that's an interesting topography, okay? Interesting physical sort of setting. And you can work into this and say, the climate. I'm not going to try and write climate because I can never spell it. Yeah, it's got some weird vowels in it. What are some books with interesting climates that are cool to you? Here's Way of Kings.
This farm.
Good! Empire Strikes Back. Return of the Jedi. Interesting topography, climate sort of things. What else? What other types of physical setting can you think of?
Wildlife.
Wildlife. Okay. What are some books with cool wildlife?
I'm not saying it.
Anything with dragons. What else?
Elves and dwarves.
Harry Potter. Harry Potter does have some really cool wildlife to it, doesn't it? Yeah. Is the wildlife in Harry Potter a source of conflict? Yes, it is. Very much so. Is it a source of passion to some of the characters? Yes, it is. Is it a source of awesomeness in some of the books? Yes, it is. Hey, it worked really well in that book, and I would indicate that this wildlife thing is part of what makes some of these books work. Hagrid is awesome because of this. So what else? What other physical? Let's throw them out. What other physical? If the humans weren't there, what else would?
Less synchronized.
Skies.
Okay, cool skies. Okay. Yeah, it's ash falling from the skies. A post-apocalyptic fantasy world. Yeah.
Would the magic system fall into this?
Magic system definitely can. Magic can. It depends. Like that one can really cross, but we will do the magic last because that's kind of its own big thing. And so I'll probably spend like 20 minutes on magic.
Lighting?
What's that?
Lighting?
Lighting. Yeah, lighting. Anyone read? Boy, I can't remember names today. Nightfall. Right? You guys read Nightfall? World where there are enough suns that night never falls on this world, except once every like forever. And there are archaeologists discovering that there's a cataclysm. They don't know that nightfall is coming. They're like, wow, every period of time there's a huge cataclysm, and the next one's coming. What's going to happen? All the suns will set. That's cool. Source of conflict, passion for the characters, and an innate sense of awesomeness. Okay. Anything else? What else? I want to go on this for a little while longer.
I feel like the existence of air or breathable air.
Okay, the atmosphere. Okay, what else? Sure, diseases. What else?
Precious metals or precious gems.
Okay, yeah.
Can we just say geology?
Elements and geology, yeah. Yep, what else we got?
Is there a level of deity that could be included in this?
Maybe, yeah. You can go ahead and say races. We kind of fall under this one. Yeah. Weather. Well, yeah, weather. Kind of climate, but sure. We can make. I didn't actually write that because I can't spell it. Yeah.
The size of your land masses and how divided they are from
Oh,
each other.
wonderful. That's a great one. Land masses.
Can you reach one side of the continent from the other or not? Are there mountains in the way?
Yeah, size, shape, tectonic activity. Ooh. So yes, Earthsea, right? We've got the land mass shapes and things. Yeah, go ahead.
Technology?
Okay, we're gonna put culture is probably tech level over there. So you're jumping the gun. Yeah. Okay. Yes, we got wildlife. Now we need our flora. Okay. We could probably keep on going with this. If we do, we will just end up dividing these things into smaller and smaller pieces, which is just fine. But thinking about what sort of interesting things you can come up with in your physical setting, I am, as a reader, very tired of, hey, it's generic medieval England. That's lazy. It wasn't lazy way back when. The genre was brand new, and the idea of, hey, it's kind of medieval England, but it's not, was really cool. Right? Because it's like, wow, I haven't read this before. It's kind of like medieval England, except there are dragons and things. And that's now lazy. You should be able to do all kinds of cool things with this and add to it. Now, that's not to say something like His Majesty's Dragon, which is Napoleonic Wars plus dragons. Those are awesome. That's great. The amount of research that goes into making that setting feel real requires a lot of work. What I'm saying is the sort of, I'm just going to assume that this looks just like every other fantasy world, that there are some forests here and we come from the village board. It's just lazy. You can do so many cool things with this stuff. You only need to add one or two of them. And I would suggest that every story you're building, you should be looking for a couple of these. Shorter stories, short stories, you're going to pick one thing often and write about it. So you don't have to do this, but, novella, novel, you should have a couple of these things where you're like, this is going to be a source of interesting conflict, story, and awesomeness for my book. So that when someone picks it up and they say, oh, wow, what's that? I want to do this is the latest weird branded one. I want to do Teslatopia. Does anyone know what Tesla really wanted to electrify the air, right? He wanted to make a current so you could plug something into the ground, and the electricity pass from the ground to the air to the ground. He's gonna have these big beacons that beam electricity through. If you guys watched the movie The Prestige, they showed him out planting light bulbs in the ground at one point and having them glow. That was because he was experimenting with this during a time. Granted, that's science fiction because he actually invents teleportation in that movie. But anyway, I'm like, I want to have a world where the ground is electrified, and like the flora and fauna, deal with this. Like animals will shoot, they will shoot out spittle that has something in the middle of it that makes it so that they are shooting tasers at people, and stuff like this, where you can build off of the ground. And so I go really out there. Okay, you don't have to go as far as I am, but these sorts of things are going to be really fun for you in your world building. And the great thing about this, and we'll get to the culture setting, there's something in here that you're an expert in because you're just passionate about it that most people don't know as much about. Whether it's something simple like, I don't know, that you were really great at embroidery, or whether you're a physicist. There's going to be something that's your passion that you can take and turn into a theme for your characters in your books that is going to really make your book shine. Yes? Food, yeah. What do they eat? Yeah. Bud, as my wife puts it, because of the Sparshide strip. You guys seen that one? It's like the dog who is hiding behind the washing machine and has written cat Bud on a sheet, stepped into like the washing machine. It's like peeking around to see if you can get the cat to slip in the washing machine. Yeah, it's hilarious. All right.
Where does the physical, where does it get to be too much? Where's that balance in trying to do everything, but
trying to do it too much. That's a great question. And this is going to depend on the story you're telling, okay? And your practice level with it. Certain books of mine, I've done much less than other ones. Doing more of this increases your learning curve and increases your page count. And so I would say the idea is, you decide how many viewpoint characters you're going to have. Come up with one or two of these things that are going to directly impact them, and then come up with one or two of these things for the setting that you're in that can add an interesting depth of conflict. Whether if it's all taking place in one city, add one sort of physical setting to the city. Where is it built? It's different, and things like that. All right, but I would agree. Don't go too far. Practice with this and decide. A lot of this is going to have to do with what we talk about next week, which is how to do the info dubs in a really compelling and interesting way, and concrete descriptions and things like that, how much you can get away with, but it's your own personal threshold. Most urban fantasy, for instance, for those who are writing urban fantasy, they really seem to pick one out of this list and one out of this list, and really only deal with one of each in a given book. If you read the Dresden Files, there'll be like one wacky race and one aspect of the culture that Harry Dresden is really dealing with a lot in that book. And then the next one might add some more, another one, or something like that. And those books are short and thick, so. All right, let's brainstorm some. This one can go forever, so we're gonna do a little ways in this. These are the cultural things. I'll see this up here by starting with things such as parent-child relationship. And these can be different for the different cultures in your story. So, yeah, you can go. What other things are part of the cultural setting? Gender roles. Yes, indeed. Gender role? Yeah, role. That says gender. Religion. Okay, throw them out.
Government.
Yes, government. I famously wrote an entire novel where the government was based on an MLM. It's called Elantris. Go watch it. Read it again sometime. Like, what if an MLM were in charge of the country? What else? What's that? Schools. Yes. Education. Ooh, yes. Military. Let's do, and also military. You can also go with warfare. What else do we have here? Economics. Yes. Folklore. If you talk to Lee Modesitt, who is a former economist who writes fantasy novels, he complains about this one a lot. Fantasy novels are not well known for having realistic economies. And having some basic understanding in economics can really help your fantasy novel feel real, particularly that segment of the population who knows anything about it. What are all these armies eating? It's sometimes, I'll be honest with you guys, sometimes you just have to, It depends on the type of story you're writing, but sometimes you just say, this is the story I want to tell, and I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that. What did we talk about a couple of weeks ago? That in order to justify traveling to a planet to get something and mine it off, that thing would have to be worth more than the planets are and things like that. Like Avatar, the movie, could really never exist because it's impossible for this stuff to be as valuable as the amount of resources it spends to get there. We ignore this stuff in space opera. And you just have to. But not being really blatant and ridiculous about it is probably a good idea. And if you're writing hard science fiction or its equivalent hard fantasy, you see a lot more hard fantasy. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about things like His Majesty's Dragon, where there are accurate things and you want it to be portraying the world accurately. So you got to pay more attention to that. What was the one that got thrown out here before? Folklore. Folklore. Ooh, good. You ought to take, if you're interested in all, by the way, you have a great folklorist on staff here at BYU, Dr. Thursby. She's awesome. I'm not just saying that because she's my thesis chair. Go ahead.
Music.
Music. Yeah, music. Great one. You can probably think of some fantasy and science fiction books in which music was the source of passion, conflict, and whatnot in the books. I know Lee Modesitt did an entire series on it. There was also Alan Dean Foster did one where a rock star goes to a fantasy world. Yeah, it's all sorts of cool stuff. Yeah.
Architecture?
What's that?
Architecture?
Architecture. Okay. Ooh, arts. Yes. Tastes. Yes. Prejudices. Yes, ethnicity and how they deal with ethnicity. Ooh, yes. That's that a source of conflict and passion? No, never. Oh yeah. Demographics and how they relate to each other. Yeah. So, like I said, we can go on forever. Go ahead. Recreation, yeah. History. And you can probably see there are a few of these up here that if you're going to imagine your mind generic fantasy novel, they usually tend to spend pages and pages and pages about this one, but they ignore recreation, right? Or they ignore some of these other things. It's like only history and linguistics matter. And maybe ethnicity, but we don't spend any time on parent-child relationships in the society or things like that. Which is why it feels like there's a few of these that have been done to death. That doesn't mean you can't do them yourself. There's a few that everyone kind of latches onto, and the rest get ignored, which is why the genre feels very stale. I would offer to you that there is so much stuff in here that we could be doing cool things with that we're not. That this genre still has not hit its stride. I think fantasy is still in its infancy. I think that science fiction, though having a couple good decades on fantasy as established genres, is a little bit further along, but there is so much more stuff to plumb here that has not been dealt with. The human experience is full of variety and depth, and our stories should reflect this. And whatever you are passionate about, you can turn into things the characters are passionate about. Now, what's really going to be cool is when you start letting, say, the topography influence the religion. Or you're picking a few of these interesting things and you are making them influence one another to build up your storytelling and to make it, that's where you're going to get your depth. Your depth is going to be from extrapolating the cool things you come up with, and extrapolating conflict, passion, and all of these things about them. You want to be, this is Sanderson's third law. You want to be deep in what you're doing rather than wide. So let's go into Sanderson's laws. Sanderson's laws, remember law number 0, err on the side of awesome. Sanderson's laws are things I developed when I was writing my stories to be pieces of advice to myself. I tried to write them in a way that they are broadly useful to everyone, that they are kind of more like writing laws, but really at their core, they are meant to be things that I try to follow in my writing because I found that they make my writing better. They make the stories be more like the types of stories I want to be telling. You may each come up with your own laws. These are the guidelines that you follow to achieve the type of writing that you want. And the first one came, and these all are themed toward magic, but I really feel that they're larger in scope than just about world-building magic. The first one came at Worldcon. Excuse me if you've heard the story, but it is a fun story. So I'm a brand new author. This is Worldcon in 2004, I think. Whichever one was, it's the first one that I sat on panels for, and I think it was, no, it was right before LA, because I wasn't on the Warbound. I think LA was 2006. So this was either 2005 or 2004, and I think it was in Boston. So I'm sitting on paneling for the first time. I've been going to these conventions for a while, trying to break in. I'm super excited. They ask what kind of, your little questionnaire you get, what kind of panels would you be good on? I'm like, well, I love magic systems. Put me on a magic system panel. And I get my thing, and lo and behold, my first panel, I may have only had two, but I was on a panel that was, how does the magic work? I'm like, great. I can get up there, and something I actually know how to talk about. This is going to be wonderful. I go to the panel, and if you haven't ever been to a panel, science fiction convention, just they put a bunch of authors in a row at a table, and then there's a moderator who directs questions at them, and then the authors each kind of give their answer to the question, and then there's another question, and yada, yada, yada. And hopefully it's entertaining. If Pratchett's on the panel, it is. If he's not, it's hit or miss. The rest of us are not Terry Pratchett. But so the panelists the moderator got up there. We're all sitting there, and they asked the first question. They're like, all right, well, let's just start the panel off with opening thoughts. What is the first thing that you think is most important about magic systems? And I'm on the end, so they start with me. And I say, well, magic systems should have rules. I was trying to go really safe, right? Magic systems have rules. The other three panelists all looked at me and said, are you crazy? That ruins a magic system. The thing I thought was taken for granted. And then we proceeded to spend several minutes, maybe longer than that, debating this fact where I'm the brand new writer and they are just pummeling me for my stupid comment. And I'm sure I've built it up in my mind greater than it was, but I sure felt embarrassed. I'm like, I learned this from Orson Scott Card, okay? He's not wrong. It's in his How to Write Science Fiction and Fantasy book. Magic should have rules. And then I started to listen to what the other people were saying. And they wrote urban fantasy, mostly. And their argument was that the more you define the magic, the more rules you place on something, the more of the sense of wonder and magic you write out of your world. And their argument was that the story is going to feel much cooler and it's going to work much better if the reader doesn't know what the magic can do, and in fact the characters don't know what the magic can do, and then it's going to be the source of wonder, like Tolkien they mentioned. And if you read Tolkien, you really have no clear idea of what Gandalf can do, unless you've read like all of the appendices, and then you get a little better idea. But when you're reading the actual books, like, what can Gandalf do? He's a wizard. He does stuff. Sometimes moths are involved. There's some eagles. He does. It's really cool. Just trust me. He can fight a Balrog. How? Because he's Gandalf. But this was the discussion. I started to realize there was a really valid point to this that I had never considered before. And I started to decide, why do I like the magics with all of the rules? And what I get with the magics that are all the rules is I can have a character who is figuring out the magic, sense of progression, right? As they go along, I can have the rules be made clear so that the character can be forced to use the tools at hand. I feel that if you can just do anything, you really risk a Deus Ex Machina, where you just are like, whatever, we get to the ending and blah. And these were discovery writers who probably had a lot of their endings be, we get to the ending and blah, but that's not important because the character dynamic was so powerful that that's what you're reading the story for.
So I can see both sides. I really think it just depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell.
Yes, and that's where Sanderson's first law came in. And Sanderson's first law is this. Your ability to solve problems in a satisfying way, I added that on later, with magic to how the reader understands said magic. I should have you be writing this, shouldn't I, Corbett? Sure. You're going to write the next one, because then I can talk while you're writing. So I'll call you up. Plus, your handwriting's probably better. Your ability to solve problems in a satisfying way with magic is directly proportional to how the people understand, how well the reader, yeah, that's what I wrote. How well the reader understands said magic. So you can find that on my website. You can find that on Wikipedia, I think. So you don't have to type it all out, and you don't have to try to read this.
On the writing advice thing, I added links to all your laws.
There you are. So you can get this lecture in essay form. Nice work. So what does this law mean? This was a law to myself, where I'm saying, if I want to solve my problems with magic in my book, I really need to give the reader those tools so that they understand the problem solving. The idea behind this is promises and fulfilling them. And this is a greater writing law. This is actually just a law of foreshadowing. Okay? If you want to solve a problem in your story in a satisfying way, then the reader needs to know that the characters have the tools to solve that problem before they actually do. Now, you don't need to be direct with those tools. In fact, you should not be direct. You should give the tool and then have it used in an interesting way. Did I guys tell you the Monkey Island story? Monkey Island is this great series of video games, right? And in the video games, what they do is when you get to a sword fighting section, you insult each other. You trade insults. And if you are able to trade an insult in an interesting way, then you win a step in the sword duel, okay? My favorite of the series is the third one. And in the third one, the insults have to rhyme. So one will spat out something at you, and you have to come up with a rhyming couplet that re-insults them. They'll say, your mother was a warthog. And you'll say, at least I don't look like a log. I don't know, something like that you rhyme with, right? And the way that the reason it was so cool is you learn all of these by listening to the pirates. You will insult one of them, and they'll throw one back to you. And you're like, oh, now I know that insult, and I can do that, the repartee. When you get to the climax of the story, all the insults are new, but one of your retorts that you have learned rhymes and fits with the insult, and you can throw it back, and you have to just figure out which of the pairs you got rhymes and makes sense with the insult. Does that make sense? Like, there's a brand new thing, but you can say, at least, I don't look like a log, and it still rhymes and still works with the couplet. Go look them up. They're brilliant. And it's this idea. You give the tools to the reader. My characters can do this, this, and this. You think they're going to do this, this, and this. We show them doing, thing Y all through the story. But then they need to use thing Y to solve problem Z in a brand new way by the climax. And that's what you're trying to do with this. You're trying to give them the tools and have them used in interesting, different ways. But this is a sliding scale, all right? The more you describe how the magic works, the less of the sense of wonder to the magic you're going to have, okay? And most of the time, if you are describing, you are moving toward problem solving and away from mystique. That's okay if it's a story you want to tell. But the issue here is that if you want to describe less and move toward the sense of wonder, that's okay too. However, be aware that if you solve problems with the magic, it is going to be unsatisfying to the reader because they don't have these tools. So your story needs to be about something else. If you're writing a primary romance novel where your promises are about the romantic relationship between the readers, then when you solve problems with your magic, as long as you're not solving the romance problem, you're okay. In Tolkien, the problem is we need to get to the chasm, or to throw the thing in. That's the big problem. The ring's got to go in the hole, right? Go for the British dude. Go throw the ring in the hole. You'll notice lots of sense of wonder. Do they ever solve that problem with the magic? That's the one thing that Gandalf never does, right? And people harp on it. They joke about it, like the eagles could have flown them, and all of this stuff. But the reason that he didn't was because of this. He was heavy on the sense of wonder, so he didn't use as much problem solving. And when he did have Gandalf solve problems, they were little increments along the way, and he made them make more trouble. This is a great way you can solve problems with magic if you're on this side, is once the problem gets solved, you solve the problem, you have it cause even bigger problems. You've let you've opened Pandora's box. We've done this great thing, but now Gandalf's dead. This is a big deal. And so if you can make a really heavy cost, and it doesn't really progress, doesn't solve their problems, it lets them continue on trying to solve their main problem, you're doing a great job on this. On the converse, be aware that if you describe a whole bunch, then you're going to have to find other sources of a sense of wonder in your fantasy novel. Your magic can be cool, but it's not going to be as wondrous the more you describe it, the more the readers use it. And so that's where you fall back on some of these things to give yourself more of a sense of wonder and mystique. Or you do the thing where you've got multiple magic systems. One's really well understood, the other one's not. However you want to do it, this is a tool that I've found works really well for understanding reader expectations. Okay? There was a question or comment over here.
It was a comment on Lord of the Rings, and you made it.
Yeah,
So-
the Eagles. Those Eagles!
Yes.
All right. Yeah.
So like, in Harry Potter, there's like a really disciplined magic rules for like how the wands work, the spells, and then there's
Yeah, Harry Potter's like in the middle. For a given book, she inches toward this, but for the entire series, she goes back to this side. For instance, in between books, they don't ever use the magic from the previous books. Like polyjuice potions would have been so useful. Time turners? Guess what we could have used time turners to do? We have time travel. Let's save Harry's parents. No, we can't save Harry's parents. Let's save Dumbledore. No, we can't save Dumbledore. We can take extra classes. Okay. But time turner works pretty well for its own rules in the book that it's introduced in. So she tends to stay a little more toward problem solving for one book, but her whole general magic system has a sense of wonder. You never know what the magic is capable of. You know a few things that the magic is capable of, and those are repeatable. So that works very well as kind of a middle of the road thing, if you want to do it. A couple of things are possible. They're very strict with those couple of things, but you never know when new powers are going to be manifest. Early comic books were like this. Late comic books are much more like this. Early comic books are like, Superman might need a new power. So we'll have him manifest it. And then when he uses it, it's usually going to be the same way that he always has used it. But at any point, it's like, now I kiss people and they forget. That was from the comics. They didn't make that up. What's his name? For the movie. But so, anyway. We've got to move on to the other laws. But just, hopefully this will help you. But when you're building all of these things, keep this in mind. This applies to everything. If your religion is going to be part of what solves problems, make sure you've explained it a lot. If it's going to be a source of conflict and things, make it important to the characters, and it will lose a little bit of mystique over time, but you can find other ways to do that, or you can decide you don't want to explain everything. Law number two. Law number two. Law number two, not quite so long. Law number two is that... Oh, did I? No, this is why you're here. Law number two is that that limitations are usually more interesting than the powers themselves. Okay? When you're designing your magic system, I have found that thinking about what it can't do and why is going to give you a better magic system. Why do you think this is? So you're making already do everything, okay?
I've heard it described as a villain superpower where it's so much that it's
Yeah, things are too easy. You're kind of dancing around it. Conflict is where your story is, right? We've talked about this. What a magic system can't do is kind of your conflict. But it's also your limitations. Well, you do have good handwriting. It's very nice. Very masculine, yet readable. Go ahead.
Limitations can make things interesting. Like
Yes.
the early Green Lantern couldn't use his powers on anything yellow. So
Right.
when a yellow lantern flies in, the audience goes, "Oh crap, what's going to happen now?"
Right.
And
Yeah, superheroes are a good one to pick up because superheroes do tend to be more on the, we know what their powers are and we kind of know their limitations unless the writer's getting flaky. And so if we use Superman as an example, what are Superman's stories about? Where are the conflict? Where are the interesting stories? If you've seen or watched or read a really cool Superman comic, what was this conflict about?
Problems that can't be solved through strength.
Yes, problems almost all the time. It's like, I have to fit in with human society. I can't solve Lois Lane with strength. Well, I probably could once. And then I have no Lois Lane. She's kind of annoying in the comics, I'll just say that. But, no, you can't solve that problem. Superman's problems often come in from the fact that he has a sense of honor. A lot of the comics writers play into this idea. Superman has a sense of honor. He's the Boy Scout in the DC world. He won't do certain things. This gives him all sorts of problems. That's his conflict. If it isn't one of those things, then what is it? Kryptonite. That's the other source of Superman's stories. And this is just a very natural outgrowth of the writers trying to come up with ways to have a conflict for Superman that makes a story. If Superman solves it on page 1, there isn't this story. Your magic system is actually the same way. What are the things you're going to run into is everything's been done, okay? But it's not been done in every way. Everything's been done. One of my most famous magic systems is from the Mistborn books. And what people can do in these books is they can they can push on metal with their mind. Move it around. Metal can be moved. It's basically Magneto's power, right? Which is basically just telekinesis. It's the Force. This is the magic system that's been used forever. And yet, I get lots of fan mail saying, this magic system's so original. I've never seen anything like it before. And yet, it's one of the oldest, most well-used magic types ever written. I think one of the very first, the cavemen were coming up with powers, the one that's like, I wish I could move that rock with my mind. Probably came up pretty quickly, right? If I could kill that T-Rex without having to go out there, yes, I know they weren't there when they're T-Rex, but you know what I mean. If I didn't have to go there and fight him, and I could just the rock would just go, that'd be awesome. Telekinesis is there. So why does Mistborn work? Why do people write to me and say, this magic system is so original? Well, one of the places it came from was me actually watching the Star Wars films. I got it right this time. And watching, there's this point where, Darth Maul, points at something and points somewhere else, and it just flies over there. And I'm like, I know these are space wizards, and it's really this space wizard magic, but that feels so unrealistic to me. Which is a stupid thought to be having. But yes, I'm a fantasy person. I'm like, really, if you're thinking about telekinesis, you should follow the laws of vector physics. You should only really be able to use your force away from yourself or toward yourself, and they do that a lot. Why is he now doing this thing? What's the leverage for throwing this thing over there? There's nothing behind it. And anyway, I'm like, this is stupid, Braden. It's the force. They can just do it. And I'm like, well, I want to write a magic system which uses the idea of mass versus mass when you are telekinetically pushing something away from yourself or pointing toward yourself. And I started doodling with this magic system, and it was really fun to write. That's the other thing. Number one, it was something I hadn't seen done before, and it was really fun. And I realized why it was really fun was that I was forcing these limitations on myself and my readers, and my characters. Myself and characters have to stretch. All right? If I have to stretch and my characters have to stretch to solve the problems, then it's going to be just, number one, more fun to write. It's going to be way more interesting to read. And so by adding this limitation of, yes, we can use telekinesis, but you have to, if you push on something heavy in yourself, it throws you backward. Well, that's a feature, not a bug. Now I know how to fly, right? I put something down, I push on it, I zip up into the air. But if I am trying to shove somebody who's heavier than me, then I'm in trouble because it's going to throw me backwards. So I got to brace myself. And all of a sudden the characters have to do all of these sort of things to use the magic system, which makes for engaging writing. Nothing is more boring than having a conflict in a book that takes place all kind of in the characters' heads. Imagine like this thing where nothing is actually being described. You can't actually do anything. The characters are just having this mind battle where they're staring at each other. And I've tried to write these before. Sometimes you can pull them off in a fun way. But really, if you want to have a really dynamic and engaging conflict, you've got to have motion, you've got to have ups and downs, you've got to have the characters thinking in an interesting way and following a thought process, and something like this, where I've got to get in position and I've got to worry about their weight. It gave me lots of limitations that then forced me to write more interesting stories. Limitations are like this for your magic system, and they are the source of your conflict, and they are a source of your storytelling. You can do anything you want, science fiction or fantasy. This is why we write these genres. So why aren't your characters doing anything they want? Asking yourself that brings you to this one. I added other limitations on this magic, and I go through it in the essay I wrote about this one. But I added the idea that we added an economic component. I love the economic component. It's one of my favorite magic systems is in Dune, because it finally solved the whole, for me, hey, why are they coming to this planet to mine these resources? It makes no sense. Unless, who was it that pointed that out? Was it one of you over here that said, without it you can't do FTL, with it you can do FTL, so suddenly it fixes this issue. And I love the economic component to it. And so I wanted there to be an economic component to Mistborn. Not just for the actual economy, which it is, but to the character. The character has a limited resource that they run out of. Having a limited resource is like the bullets in the 6-shooter. Again, a lot of these things are a sense of progression, because you can have the hero run out of bullets in their gun whenever you feel it's appropriate. That's how you write stories. That's what you can do. And the same way you can have someone run out of their metal whenever you want them to. You set up the story, but having that limitation allows me to create conflict for the character, and it allows for me for better storytelling. And all of my magics, I found out when I start putting limitations on it that are interesting and work with the magic, it forces me to stretch and create a magic system that is more dynamic and more fun to write. Okay? Again, there's a big old essay on this one. And then the third law. The third law is the one I just wrote. And how did I write this one, Isaac? Do you remember how I wrote it? Because I went through like 20 iterations of what I should do. And I think I ended up writing something. We'll find out what the official one from Wikipedia. You have to wait until Wikipedia tells us. But the idea on this one is that you want, I feel a great magic system, for me, is one that takes a few ideas and narrows in on them and explores them fully, as opposed to taking and trying to throw everything into the plot. Yeah.
Expand what you already had before you add something new.
There you are. Expand what you already have before you add something new. Now, these are laws again for all storytelling. Go ahead.
Could I give an example of this?
Go for it.
One of my favorite magic systems is from a video game called Infamous.
Oh yes,
which,
Infamous.
Yeah. The main
Great
character can manipulate electricity, and that is all he can do. But using the way he manipulates electricity, he can skate along rail lines, he can, shoot lightning bolts, he can chain someone to the ground. They use only this one power to do all these awesome things with it.
They're fun games. They're great stories too. I like the Infamous games are some of my favorite from recent years. So yeah, we have an instinct, as I said earlier, when we're world building, to try to do all this stuff. But the best stories tend to be the ones that take a few of these things and narrow in on them and deal with the relationships between them and the other things that you're focusing on, that narrow in and say, instead of, I'm going to create 50 different cultures for my world. Look how awesome my world is. If you can instead take a few cultures and dig into them in great depth, your story will feel more real than if you have 50 cultures. Because then it's going to feel like it's, number one, it's going to be more boring to read, no one can keep track of it, but we have this sense that wideness, there's this idea of wideness. And I'm not sure if I can get this concept across to you, that the world building is wide. That means there's so much in there, but it's not deep. It's like, I've heard a certain game that I won't mention because it's described as an ocean that's an inch deep. Which means you can go lots of places, but there's nothing to do in those places. And that's what you want to avoid with your magic system and your storytelling in general.
I was just gonna ask, so you said like 50 filters.
Yeah.
What if you like reference that there are 50 filters, but you don't
Yeah.
talk about them?
Oh, that's fine. That's perfectly all right. But the idea is that what you're digging your story into and what you're spending your pages on is you want to be spending your pages. And this goes with your magic system. When you're developing your magic system, it's at some point this law became a law to me when I was developing Way of Kings, where I'm like, well, I did 3 magic systems in Mistborn. I've got to go bigger. And I started world building. I'm like, how many magic systems can I cram into this book? It's going to be so awesome. And I found that in each of them, what's that?
10.
Yeah. Well, I found in each of them I was trying to cram in that it was that none of them were all that cool. And I realized I need to take and focus on the ones I have, and I might do 1 per book. But I'm going to dig into the story, the magic system I have, and make it really interesting. And this was working so much better. The problem here is you don't want to fall into the Hollywood mentality. Well, I've done this thing, now I have to do 2 things. The villains from Hollywood films. The sequel has 2 villains. The sequel to that has 3 villains. Suddenly, each of those villains are 1/3 has 1/3 as much depth as the villain from the first movie.
Just think about Way of Kings. Would you put like the equipment and the magical items that they use as their own magic system?
It really depends on your definition, how you want to define things. Yes, you could say that they are in that book, but what I'm trying to get across to you is writers, and when you've got a 1,200-page book or a 1,000-page book, you can dig a little bit deeper into more things than you can when you've got a 300-page book. But before you add something new, ask if you can take the thing that you have and dig a little bit deeper into it. This goes for your magic system, but it goes for all of your writing. See if you can extrapolate. Have you really said, if people can do what? If they can make, the famous example from Piers Anthony is he would call things spot-on-the-wall powers. Oh, they can make a spot on the wall. That's their magic power. I can think of all kinds of cool stuff you can do with the ability to make a spot on the wall. I could write a book about someone whose only ability is to make spots appear on flat surfaces. And that person could do awesome things. And he's blinding people, and he's doing Morse code, and he's all this, you do all kinds of cool stuff. Can you take one little thing, have you extrapolated what that's going to do to your society before you add another thing? And by the time you've added like 10 or 12, you're going to be in this position where you've added so much that none of them really even do anything, and your book will feel fake rather than deep.
Is that kind of what you're doing with the Alcatraz series?
Partially,
Like,
yeah.
The power is I can get arrive things lately.
Yes, I can arrive late. The Alcatraz really came from me wanting dumb things that I do to be superpowers. Before I had Isaac to make me be on time, I was late to everything. And so I'm like, how can being late be a superpower? Well, I'll arrive late to a bullet that's being shot at me. All right, we are out of time. So if you have questions, write them down for next week. We will talk about pros against next week and how to describe. And everyone go to LQE. It's wonderful. All right, thanks. Here's our little thing right up here. You, Nikki.